I'm going to show you some really easy DIY tools to get your projects off the ground and get a real sense of confidence with your planning process. So we're going to cover something called drill down today. You find me here today in my home office, which transforms into my training studio these days, which looks completely different when our customers are receiving their training, which I can give you a little insight into later in the video. The reason for today's video is actually about some project management courses that we've been delivering lately. I find that people are often daunted by the prospect of project management at work. If they haven't been officially trained, they're not sure what tools to use, if they haven't got a clear system. What I'm going to hopefully show you today is that a kind of DIY approach can be very useful with a few simple tools so that you can get fairly major projects up and running and feeling fairly confident about your approach quite easily. Constantly reminded about the project that was the building of my own home office. Something I had no experience in whatsoever, never done anything like it before, and just decided there's a space at the bottom of my garden and I quite fancy having a room for all the stuff that just won't fit in the house anymore when our second child was coming along. So I'd like to share just a few little ideas that we cover in the course that I used very well when planning this build. So this is the shed itself from the outside. It's a bit more than a shed, I suppose, but it's all I refer to as. With a door around here. So this was kind of planned out the ground from scratch with no experience, a few bits of advice from some friends. This now serves as my training place of work. Thank you so much for joining me to address 3 key objectives. But hopefully we'll be getting back out there, coming to visit people in their workplaces and in the hotels that we use all around the country soon enough. I look forward to seeing you out there. Let's take you back inside then to go through the process for planning this little edifice. This was the first sketch I drew, but this all came from hundreds and hundreds of little sketches on both pages. So I don't recommend this as a way to plan your project unless you've got no experience in building whatsoever and you've got to work out every single dimension to make things precise and kind of get an idea in your head about what you're trying to achieve. That's kind of what's the concepts and things. All those sketches are all well and good, but that's really after the planning process has been complete and I'm working out how to solve the problems of actually doing the build. This sheet, which is actually from our example project management PID document, the project initiation document, where there's a kind of high-level milestone plan. It was the thing that I used to initially map out the various stages of this build. This is a really good starting point just to get a sense of progress and flow and really kind of think about the beginning and end point of any project and how it breaks down into the major stages. From this point we drill down further and that's where post-it notes come in. So here you can see the original photograph I took after finishing the planning process. You can see that piece of paper there and my initial sketch, but with these post-it notes that started the process, you can see here that they're all kind of neatly organised into a flow. But of course it doesn't start that way. So there are some steps to go through to really help you get your head around what can be complicated, drawn out projects of lots of different moving parts to really give you some clarity. So I'm just going to take you through how I got to this point and was able to then kind of get started with the project with enthusiasm and a bit of confidence that I had most things covered. And given that I've been locked down for a year now, not able to come out to site, I should have a stash of post-it notes sitting around somewhere. Okay, so I've got my post-it notes and a pen. This is all we need to get into some real good project planning. It's a technique called drill down, whereby we're going to choose a different stage, each milestone. In this case I'm going to go for a fairly early stage in this process was to prepare the ground. So the back of my garden that had a couple of fairly substantial bushes in there and needed clearing as well as flattening, ready for the build to go ahead mainly. So we start with the section or the milestone area that we're interested in, and then we use these post-it notes to just add ideas as they come to mind. We don't really need to think about ordering or scheduling or anything like this at the moment. This is just, can we think of all the things that will need to be done and focus just on that at the moment. The understanding of how long these things take, what they might cost, and what order they need to go in should be kept out of mind for the time being and tackled as separate, distinct procedures. So this is stage one of the drill down. We just work out what do we need to do, which is, in this case, clear the bushes. We put that just as a note out there randomly. Very useful to use kind of whiteboards and your office wall for this sort of activity. Hence the sticky note being quite useful here. We're going to move things around a little later on. So I also need to flatten the soil. I need to remove a little bit of turf. I also need to dig some post holes. Now, because I've thought of digging the post holes, I know I need to do some measuring of where those will be. Measuring the ground. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to stake it out, I think. I've seen this happen on sites with some technical instruments, but I'm going to try it with a couple of bits of wood and some string. I think that's probably do it well, good enough. But what else needs to be done? So I can now kind of review what I've got. Just some ideas that these two have put together. The post holes, the measuring the ground, and I'm thinking actually, well, we're flattening the soil, digging things out. Have I got the right equipment for this? So there might be, I certainly needed a shovel. What else? If I'm going to clear some bushes, remove some turf and flatten some soil, I like to have a very clean working space when I'm working. Perhaps too much for some people's taste. I remember watching Grand Designs and seeing the Huff House built in a few days, and just the level of cleanliness that was going on at the end of each working day and at the end of the project was, for me, a quite inspiring way to work, given my need for some level of orderliness. Already the post-it notes are a bit less orderly than I would like, but I'm going to force myself through this because it's a very useful way to go. And so clearing the site will be involved in the final parts of the preparation. I'll just shove that over there for the time being. And in clearing the site, I might need to hire a skip or similar. Maybe I'll be able to do it by trips to the tip, etc. So this process continues on just as you think through this idea of preparing the ground and using these individual post-it note ideas to generate more and more thoughts about the specific tasks that are going to be required to bring this whole thing together. What does preparing the ground mean? Well, I've got a good idea in my mind of what it looks like when it's complete. Nice flat surface with the post holes ready to get some concrete poured and to start the structural build. So in understanding my endpoint, I can use this to think through what are all the different tasks that I need that are kind of distinct and separate aspects that you could imagine delegating to different team members. It's a good way to think about the level of drill down that you need is something that you can delegate to somebody else, something that you can put a time to. Let's say that it takes an hour to flatten the soil, and that could be given some ownership. In this case, I'll have ownership for this, and I can imagine I'll have ownership for all of these, given that this is historical and that's exactly what happened. But you can imagine divvying this out, or even using this as collectively with a team, in order to generate all the right ideas, make sure that bits aren't missed. You know, many heads can be useful for this, as well as starting to generate some early buy-in to a process that undoubtedly team members are going to take some ownership for. And not only does it help them take ownership by getting involved in the creation of the plan, but they can also start to see the bigger picture by understanding where something, in this case flattening the soil, if that was delegated to an individual team member, where that fits in the overall process, so that they understand what contribution they're making and the potential consequences of getting that right or not doing it well, or if things go wrong, even to be encouraged about what communication might be required to ensure that the whole project isn't affected by delays, etc. So I'll just fill out a few more of these post-it notes and we'll pick this up at the next stage of the process. Okay, then I've added a couple of extra tasks into the full list now, and I think it's fairly comprehensive. And I've also started to look at now the second stage of this process, which is looking at each post-it note and deciding on the timing of it. You can see that I've done some already on these, and I've circled how long I think it's going to take to clear the site. I think I can do that probably in about an hour. This is a kind of estimate, really. Some things that you'll be able to estimate really well, other things it's probably worth putting a question mark in place, maybe getting other people to comment on the timings, or indeed just build some contingency in. There's a few of these tasks here where clipping back an overhanging tree I've put down as half an hour. I don't think it's actually going to take that, but this now builds a bit of contingency into my overall plan. So what I suspect might take 20 minutes rather than kind of getting down into 0.4 and 0.25 of an hour, etc. doesn't particularly work very well. And so choosing half an hour here to do something that I know takes a bit of time gives me 10 or 15 minutes probably to use as contingency on one of these activities. where I've had to buy equipment, then I've not really put down any timing. This has kind of been, done online, etc., or just delivered in, so it's just a phone call. So I've not really had to time that, but I do need to account for some cost instead. Again, looking at each of these post-it notes, I can start to qualify, is that about the right time? Have I got everything covered? And in terms of these costs, already I know that to get a skip bag filled up and taken away, it's going to cost around £30. But I'm quite uncomfortable given that I know what this does for the whole project, and having to buy equipment that's of the same price, which is just a cost that once the work's done, it's kind of going to go to waste. So it makes me kind of readdress this and think, well, actually clippers are going to be useful for the longer term. The spade, I could probably just borrow it and bring this cost down to 10 quid overall. So that's my little plan for that. So of course now I need another task to borrow a spade. So again, I'm not going to put any time in for. It's just going to be a conversation with a friend of mine. And this means for each of these activities, I've now got what needs to happen, the task, how long I think it's going to take, and ownership. I haven't filled all of these in. This would be me in this case, but again, who would be doing this on a team to allocate specific responsibility for each of these tasks to individuals. So this is stage 2 of the drill down process, having worked out all the individual post-it notes to look at and allocate timing and ownership and cost. And any other criteria that will be important for the nature of your project. Perhaps cross-functional links to other projects, where some authority or decision might need to be made by somebody other than the person planning the project, etc. These could be useful aspects that you can capture here, and we'll kind of tidy all this up a little bit later on when we start to put it into a more of kind of a formal structure. But there's another step to do just before that. So I've now got the content, a little bit of a disorganized mess, and now we're going to structure and order this. So this simply means taking hold of each of the post-it notes, looking at this overriding idea of preparing the ground and working out what goes where. Instantly, I think clearing the site's going to come later on, and I know that ahead of that, I will need to be hiring in the skip. So the starting point is to go at the end. I know where the finishing point is. What am I going to do first? I'm not sure what's going to do first, but the beauty of sticky notes like this is you can just simply move them around. I can borrow my spade up front and buy the equipment, that should be fine. I can do those things concurrently, so I'll put them next to each other like this. Above each other. And then if something is dependent on something else, I'll put it ahead of it. So I know that I can't really get at the overhanging tree until I've cleared the bushes. And the bushes are there, so I'm probably going to be early in the process, so I'm going to clear bushes, then I'll maybe be able to clip the overhanging tree. I can't flatten the soil until the bushes are cleared, so that's in the right place. And I can't dig the post holes until the soil's flattened, so that's good. Staking out the ground, measuring the ground, well, I need to do that before I dig the post holes, so that's going to go in here. I'm going to remove the turf before I flatten the soil, so I need to shove that in here. And then lay down and peg out the weed prevention sheet. So I think I'll be doing that after I've dug the post-it holes, because I want to account for the kind of spoil and mess, clean all that up. And so now I've got a flow of things I need to just prepare and buy up front, and then each stage of the process. I can again look at this and see, can things, if I am delegating these out to different individuals, can some of these things be done concurrently? But at least we have a kind of left to right, beginning to end process, which is great. We've got some timings for it all. For those of you that are familiar with project management, this would then turn into essentially a Gantt chart where you decide the start and end times for each of these tasks, list them in order, and this gives you the cascade flow of your project, typically visualized that way and known as a Gantt chart. I may well be able to look here, especially if I've got a team or help from a friend, about doing some of these things concurrently. So I can imagine here that removing the turf and clipping the overhanging tree, definitely two things that can happen, because one's at the back fence and one's a bit further forward, so two people can be working on this simultaneously. This means I can bring the whole project timeline in this case by saving half an hour. But of course it does require an other. And my pen stops working at that point. Person B is going to have to do this, so I need to consider the impact of that on and their availability, etc., and the communication that sits around this. Of course, the moment you start to break these things out into various different responsibilities, the communication elements start to make things more complicated straight away. which is why some of these project management disciplines that we cover in the course are so essential. And just to reiterate one final time, the real value here is that this potential other person would hopefully be involved in this process and identifying for themselves that they could help out. And so we reduce the risk involved as we start to allocate out work with people that may not be aware of it yet, by getting them involved in the process and in the planning early on. So to summarise this drill down technique using sticky notes like this, a simple 3-step process, and keep them separate. Step 1 is to write down one task per sticky note. Just think of them as they come to mind and use the ideas to generate the next idea until you feel like you've got a full coverage and get other people involved who might be involved in the project. Step 2, look at each post-it note individually, allocate the time you think it will take, think about ownership and cost for each item, plus any other piece of information you think will be relevant to that individual task. And then stage 3, and try and resist this until this point, to put them in the correct order. And at that point start to look for the flow of things, and can some things happen concurrently, and to see what is dependent on something else. Once you have this down, then it's a matter of simply transposing this information into whatever project management tool you intend to use. So here I am back at the computer, and I have taken the time to just list these tasks. This is all part of the prepare ground stage of the project, which is under the shed build, and I've put down the estimated hours here, and also included the start and end date, because I know that I'll be doing these things on different dates. But now I've got all the tasks, it's not that easy to kind of visualize what's going on, but as I mentioned, we're using Airtable here, which is quite a nice little tool. I don't recommend any particular tool to anybody. It's really up to you to find what works for you. But the beauty of this, once I've got my tasks in, I can quickly turn this into a Gantt chart. And here you can now see what that looks like across the timeline of events. Here we can get just a quick glance at Google's Jamboard, which is just one of many different interactive whiteboards, which in the world of pandemics and much more remote working is a really useful way to recreate the whole post-it note approach to this drill down technique, where you can engage people and have them interact online and use this any way you wish. You can see here that lots of a bit of work being gone into some idea generation here, in this case about what makes a good project manager. So if you want to find out about all these different things that our last group decided they needed, please join us at Revolution for a project management course, and I look forward to talking you through some of these ideas. Thanks so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. And if you'd like to learn how to convince your wife that building one of these things is a good idea, head over to snappyskills.com, where I've got a great e-learning package on how to put together a great business case. See you there.